Due Process awarded 9 Emmys, including the 2005 New York Emmy for Outstanding Crime Reporting Programming.
The fundamental institution you're talking about has undergone rather dramatic change. What separates out this particular change and makes it unacceptable?
A decade on the state Supreme Court. Its first female chief, one whose legacy ranges from preschool funding to gay unions.
Will you marry me?
There have been lots of ways in which the traditional idea of marriage and the relationship in marriage has changed.
Deborah Poritz, our only guest on this special edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.
In law, in New Jersey, she's the ultimate female first. The first woman to serve as Attorney General, the first woman chief of the state Supreme Court. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and we can only be talking about Deborah Poritz. Forced to leave the court just before her 70th birthday, she is now in private practice, having left an impressive, sometimes surprising legacy. Chief Poritz, when we thought of whom we'd like to have here to mark Women's History Month, our choice was an easy one. I know coming up next month you're going to be doing a panel at the State Bar Convention on the glass ceiling for women lawyers.
Yes, I will be participating.
There doesn't seem to have been a glass ceiling for you. You came late to the law, and yet you managed to become the first Attorney General, the first woman Chief Justice. Is there a message in all of this for other women lawyers, or were you just one of the lucky ones?
I think things changed enormously during the period that I was entering law school and then sort of growing up in the law. And I think I was there. There's something to being in the right place at the right time, I think. There were more and more women coming into the law. Today, 50% of the students in law school are women. When I went to law school, I believe in my class it was about 40%, which was very high. The Eastern law schools had higher percentages, but overall in the country it was much lower. It was closer to 20%.
And yet when you look at how women lawyers are doing today, and you look at who's a partner and who becomes a powerful person in the law, women aren't doing so well. So did you only bust through for Debbie Poritz, or did you bust through for everyone?
I think we've seen rather dramatic changes in government, and I was serving in government, so that made a difference. I think that the pressure on people in political life, people in the legislature, people in the executive branch, from women's groups, their awareness of the discrimination laws. Those are the kinds of things that in this arena move government ahead of the private world, I believe. And so that was another. I came along at that point in time.
Now, by no means do we want to restrict our conversation with you to gender-based issues, but I started just sort of swimming around in the world of law reviews. And it's very interesting that there's evolving something that I would call sort of a feminist critique of the presence increasingly of women on high state courts. Consists in part of descriptions of a symposium you attended with 3 other state Supreme Court justices. And 2 things emerged, and I'm curious what you think about. One was the suggestion that somehow the presence of women in positions of authority as Chief Justices had something to do with how judges on the high panels relate to each other, a more collaborative style. Is there anything to that, or is that a conceit of some academic describing your conversations?
We actually discussed that on the panel that I was on with 3 other women Chief Justices. And we talked about whether our styles were different. Chief Judge Judith Kaye in New York believes they are, that women are consensus builders. And when you have a multiple-person court, that's very, very important. I've talked in the past about, a 3-person court, a 5-person court, a 7-person court, the United States Supreme Court, how difficult it can be to achieve an opinion for the majority. And so perhaps that is a skill that women bring to that task. I do see more and more women on state Supreme Courts. State courts do the majority of the law business in this country, the business before the courts, not the federal courts. I think it's about 95% or maybe even higher of the country's business in the courts is being done in the state court systems. And when there's diversity in the state court systems, that's a really good thing.
Now, it's interesting to just put a fine point on that first part of the feminist critique. If we look at Chief Justices of Supreme Courts in the state or the United States Supreme Court, there are, even among males, some who are more inclined towards consensus. Warren was known for that, others who are not. Do you think your tendency or ability to build consensus on the court had anything to do with being a woman, and being a woman at the time you were, and your experiences?
That's hard to say, and you're absolutely right. There have been many men who have done this, operated in the same way. And I think of the New Jersey Supreme Court. We had men Chief Justices before I came, and our court is known across the country as a court that managed to achieve consensus. Because there are good reasons for that. That is, there's clarity in the law when the court coalesces around a majority opinion. If you have 7-0 in the vote or 6-1, or then people understand that this is the law and that's what it's going to be for a while. When you start having decisions that are very close, 4-3 decisions, people worry, can that change if the court changes? So the men who have been Chief Justices have achieved that consensus. I'm not sure whether that's a...
Is it unfair to ask that question of you about yourself? Is that
Perhaps it is.
Okay.
I know you won't be surprised if, before we go too far, I ask you about gay marriage, because it is certainly the decision that came out of the Poritz Court, even though you were not in the majority. It was the decision that came out of the Poritz Court that rocked this state, and I think continues to. And although you didn't get what we know from your minority opinion you wanted, which was gay marriage, call it what it is, not just equal rights called something else, there are those who say there never would have been a gay union decision without you pushing as you did. Do you think it's what you're going to be remembered for, and does that make you comfortable?
First, I would say that all 7 of us voted for equal rights and benefits for gay couples. So there was a bedrock. That consensus we were talking about was actually there on the issue that the majority opinion turned on. And I think that was very important. I spent 10 years on the court, and there's a record, and my hope is that people will look at the whole record. My dream was, my goal was certainly to lead the court in as exemplary a fashion as my predecessors had. There were some extraordinary men that led the New Jersey Supreme Court, and I only wanted to continue that legacy.
This was the last decision to come before you exited. I don't think that was a coincidence, or was it?
These things are not timed by the court. People bring their lawsuits to the court when they're ready for the court. That is, sometimes they have to go through the trial court and the appellate division. Sometimes they come from a state agency directly to the appellate division. This case came when it came. and was decided and then was issued when it was ready to be issued. We'd always issued opinions when they were ready to
And
go.
although it didn't go exactly as you had wanted it to, are you happy that justice is served with the majority decision?
I believe that the court came together on basic principle of the case, and that was very important.
The death penalty continues to be a big issue in New Jersey. And it isn't always clear, I think, to people who haven't watched the court closely, that while you're on the court, you wear a robe that says your opinion of the merits of a controversy isn't as important as your interpretation of the law. And while lawyers can say that, I'm not sure it's always clear. But Justice Coleman came here and visited us right after he retired and took the opportunity to say he had always been opposed to the death penalty. Do you have a view on the death penalty that you'd be willing to share with citizens as a citizen as opposed to a member of the court?
As a citizen, I also had very strong misgivings about the death penalty, grave concerns. I voted in the opinions of the court and the opinions that I wrote related to the death penalty according to what I believe the law that had been established by precedents of our court and the United States Supreme Court required. I have watched with great interest the Death Penalty Commission that Justice Coleman has been involved in and their report. I think it's an important issue for the citizens of New Jersey.
Let me, in the same context, both of the death penalty and the role of judges, revisit what I regard as one of the prevalent conspiracy theories in New Jersey about our court and the death penalty. And the conspiracy theory is that two successive Chief Justices and their colleagues have essentially conspired to extend judicial review, including proportionality review, so that essentially the ball stays in the air, no one gets executed, and eventually the legislature, the pro-death penalty part of the legislature will give up and go home. And that's a crude way to put it, but I think it's a fair way to articulate what some people think. What do you think about that theory? I know you've heard it.
I have heard it. We were talking about consensus before. I don't think that my brothers and sisters on the court could have been brought together in any kind of conspiracy on that issue. And I suspect that's true for the Chief Justice that preceded me. This court has been very concerned about the administration of the death penalty, that it be administered as fairly as it possibly can be. I recently heard a discussion about so many people in other states that have been found to be innocent that were on death row, and that is a specter that can haunt a judge, and to ensure that there is due process in the death penalty process, and to be very protective of all of the rights that a criminal defendant has been, I think, what's motivated the court. The precedents, the law in this state, the court had upheld the death penalty, but the court wanted to be ever vigilant to see that it was done fairly.
Till now, the legislature was far less inclined to have those concerns. However, we've seen really, I think, a sea change in attitude. With the findings of innocence has come a change in public opinion. We also now have the commission report that says, end it, do away with it. Do you think we're finished with the death penalty here in New Jersey?
I don't know. These things have a way of surprising one, and I wouldn't want to predict. I think the Death Penalty Commission did some important work, and I think we have to wait and see what happens with it.
There's another part of the feminist critique I referred to earlier that I didn't get to, which is the substantive question, which is aside from the question of whether where you have women Chief Justices, there's a more collaborative style, but the question of whether the selection process in cases gets altered because of a difference in how women as human beings and then judges may see the world. Now, obviously, people probably know, I'm not sure if everybody knows, that the court can decide which cases to take, but the universe you choose from is affected by what happens in society. But your court addressed issues like in vitro fertilization and how that affects people. The gay marriage question is one that your court addressed. A host of issues that are deeply affecting the family life of human beings in New Jersey.
That's right.
Is that in any way related to this critique? That is there a sense that as women become more powerful in the administration of judicial system, they will turn the court's eye more closely towards other issues than when the system is dominated or exclusively male, or is that an illusion?
I'm not sure of the answer to your question. What I can say is that while you're absolutely right, the court's jurisdiction is largely discretionary. The gay marriage case, by way of example, came to us on a dissent in the appellate division, and that under the New Jersey Constitution is part of our mandatory jurisdiction. And so we actually didn't exercise discretion in taking that case.
Had you had discretion to exercise, do you think it still would have been
Why
heard
did
by
I
the
know
Supreme
that was
Court?
going to be the next question? There was no vote on that, so I can't answer that. Also, if you look around the country, you will see that a lot of these issues have appeared in other state courts, whether parental notification, gay marriage. So it may be more a matter of the direction society is headed in. The state Supreme Courts eventually get, I think, the most important issues that are troubling or that are affecting the citizens of their respective states. I mean, ultimately, those that have federal issues, the United States Supreme Court decides them. But so perhaps what we're seeing is the way society is focusing on these issues. Because if we look around the country, with states where there aren't a lot of women on the Supreme Court or there aren't women chief justices, you see many of the same issues coming to the courts.
Let me raise another kind of critique, and it comes from the conservative wing of the Republican Party, which has been very quick to criticize you on everything from gay marriage to Abbott, to the issues that they say the court is using to usurp the power of the legislature. You know, activist judges has become the cry. Is there any fairness in the charge that yours was an activist court that usurped the power of the legislature to make public policy on social issues?
I've heard that criticism frequently. The court decides issues that come to it. We don't pick the issues. We've talked about that. We have an obligation to decide constitutional issues under the New Jersey Constitution, sometimes under the federal Constitution, but there we're bound by the United States Supreme Court decisions. And I think when people use the word activist, they're really not thinking about the obligation of the court to decide constitutional questions. The court makes a lot of decisions that are arguably making law. The court, in its rulemaking, actually makes law. The court can require that criminal defendants, for example, when they're questioned by the police, that there be a tape recording. That's under the jurisdiction of the court to supervise the criminal courts and the evidence that will be taken in criminal courts. Someone could argue that's making law, but that's constitutionally required of the court to have jurisdiction over the criminal courts.
But you could also argue you're also protecting constitutional values.
You could. You could.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to.
No, you're right. You're right. And the common law is, Justice Souter said once that what he missed most when he went to the United States Supreme Court, having come from state court, was the making of the common law. The common law is a tradition that comes to us from England, where courts do make law in areas where the legislature has not. Notions of fundamental fairness are part of the common law. So when people talk about activist courts, I'm not sure exactly what they mean.
But when they talk about your court as an activist court, I think one source of that criticism is you were not what was hoped for by that conservative element who hoped that a Republican appointee would come in and it would be a clean sweep, a relatively new court. The Wilentz tradition is out. Poritz is going to give us more of what we want, and they say you didn't.
Judges are bound to be independent and impartial. That's a concept that the Founding Fathers discussed at some length, and we see it in the Federalist Papers. We have that tradition in New Jersey. When I became a judge, when my brothers and sisters on the court became judges, they were bound to take that independent view of the law and to do the job in the way that was required of them. And if that disappoints any one group, it's that's what we really have to do.
Well, on the one hand, it is true that I think people in the political world, when they say activist judge, know what they mean. It's also true that the idea of separation of powers and the court being different from the political branches is a pretty tough thing. I find law students wrestle with that. And in Abbott and in gay marriage, you're doing things that to people who haven't spent a lifetime studying them look an awful like the legislative function. Are you conscious when you get into those areas of the fact that the court's legitimacy stems ultimately from people accepting its role, that that's a tough hurdle for many people, even in just understanding and analyzing what the court's doing?
Absolutely. And I've lectured about that. And I attended a lecture at Princeton University about the concept that there is, in some sense, for part of what the court does, there's an anti-majoritarian sense behind, which is, I think, exactly what you're saying. And that is difficult. And the courts have their authority. Courts don't have armies. Courts don't have ways of enforcing what they do. And so you're right, the legitimacy of what the court does depends on the court articulating why it's doing it, what the basis for the decision is, and hopefully convincing the public, regardless of what they originally believed, that the court has acted in a responsible manner and should be respected.
Talking about how you've been acting of late, you are of counsel in a law firm, but more important, you're real busy.
Yes, I am. Someone said I'm flunking retirement, I think. Yes. I am doing a lot of things that I wanted to do, and my law firm has been really wonderful about that. They understand that I wanted to do these things. I'm a drinker biddle, and they've been really
Things
good
like
about
legal
this.
I'm
on the board of legal services. The board met yesterday, in fact. I'm on the board of the Fund for New Jersey. I'm on the Judicial Advisory Council that Governor Corzine created to review proposed candidates for the judiciary, the state judiciary. I'm on the governor's Camden search committee for a chief operating officer of Camden. So
this doesn't sound like retirement, which leads me to ask you, what do you think about this idea of retiring at 70, of being forced to retire at 70? Clearly, you're not ready to retire.
I was not ready to retire. That's absolutely right. There is something to be said for bringing new people into the judiciary, and so what I would say is that perhaps today at 70 we're younger than we used to be, and if I were to rewrite the Constitution on that, I might say 75, but I do see a point to having some.
My dad at 91 would be happy that you base it not on competence, because he works every day, but on the need to just make room, although he's not even willing to agree with that
your dad is
part.
remarkable, so.
Raymond Chief Poritz, our time is up much too soon. We thank you for sharing this half hour with us. You have indeed made legal history here in New Jersey, and we really hope that you'll come back again.
Thank you.
But before we close, a few notes on due process. In recent weeks, we've gotten yet another New York Emmy nomination. We've won the Community Impact Award from the Garden State Association of Black Journalists.
Thank you all.
We are proud to say Sandy was honored with the prestigious Thurgood Marshall Award for her dedication to responsible journalism and her commitment to the pursuit of justice. And I was given the honor of presenting the award to Sandy because justice is what we're all about here at Due Process. So we hope you'll join us again next week for more on law and justice. Till then, for Sandy and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Court. I think Debbie Poritz has done an outstanding job.
And we're just had been graced by Chief Justice Poritz during her tenure on the court.
Under the leadership of Chief Justice Poritz, New Jersey continued to be the pinnacle of the legal landscape in this country.
I don't think it's been aggressive enough in moving New Jersey forward.
My thoughts about the former Poritz Court are that it carried on the liberal tradition of one of the finest Supreme Courts in the country.
She did a lot for female judges on the bench and putting them in positions such as presiding judges.
She was a brilliant jurist, and that came through in every opinion she authored. And as a result of her leadership, we as a state are better for it.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.